Hey friends, Chubby Meeple back with another Kickstarter preview for you. Today we're taking a look at a solo card game seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is Sojourn, designed by Philip Lawyer and published by Wyvern Gaming. We're going to jump over to the table, I'll give you a brief overview of how it plays, and then I'll come back here and let you know what I think. Here we see a basic setup for your game of Sojourn. You will see your player card showing your 7 health and your 7 temporal charges. These are very important because if you run out of either, the temporal charges are what allow you to travel through time. If you run out of temporal charges, you can't travel anymore and you can get stuck in history. Your health is exactly that, your health. So if you run out of health, you essentially are killed within history, a location in history. Your yellow player marker, this is indicating where you are starting. You're going to start every single game in the Jurassic period. The story of the game is you're a time traveler trying to travel home to May 20th of 2020 AD. However, something has gone horribly awry and you've landed on May 20th of 250 million BC instead. And when you're landing, your time sphere has shattered into multiple fragments across history, and you now have to travel through history to find these time fragments and then be able to spin. Once you have found 4 of your time fragments, you can reassemble your time sphere, and then you either have to have a temporal charge or a card in your hand that allows you to travel back home. And we'll take a look at that. So we have, to set the game up, you're going to have your player card with your 7 health, your 7 temporal charges. You'll set off to the side the 4 time fragment pieces. You're going to shuffle the time stream cards and deal a hand of 5, a starting hand of 5. You're also going to shuffle the destination cards, and these are going to be the different destinations that you're going to travel throughout history in your search for time fragments. And then you will also set the percentile dice aside as well, because you'll be using these as you travel and face various risks throughout time. The first thing we need to do as well is we need to take the first card off of the time stream or off the destination deck, and we place it above the current location. So in this case, we're starting in the Jurassic period, 250 million BC, and so we're going to draw the top time card, or top destination card, and we're going to place it. This is the first destination that we have the option to travel to, and this is Jamestown, May 14th, 1863 AD. So there it is, legitimately something from history, but I want to talk about the cards a little bit. Each card has a drop cost on it. The drop cost is how many of the cards from your hand, how many time stream cards you're going to have to drop or discard in order to travel to this destination. The next cost in the blue box is your temporal charge cost. So in this case, Jamestown would cost 4 to travel to. Now, with this being the first location that you turn up does not carry its temporal charge cost. So you can travel there only by discarding cards for your first location. But if this were a normal location, in addition to needing to drop 4 cards from my hand, I would also need to pay 4 of my temporal charges to get to Jamestown. And again, if I run out of temporal charges and can't travel, then I get stuck in history and can lose the game. At that point, I would move, once I've done my drop cost and my temporal charge cost, I would move my yellow player marker to this space, indicating that I've moved. There is a risk percentage, so the percentage of chance that I could take damage, and then there's a reward on the card. Whether I fail or succeed my risk roll, I would gain a certain number of cards. And we'll take a look at a different destination card here, just to give you an idea of something that's different on the risk cards. So if we look at this card, this is the Hiroshima attack, 1945, the Hiroshima bomb dropping. You'll notice that it cost me 0 cards from my hand and 0 temporal charges to travel here. However, there is a 90% chance that I will take 4 damage. And win or lose, I'm going to gain 3 cards. What the percentage check means, or this risk check means, is that I will then roll my percentage dice, and I have to roll equal to or higher than the percentage shown on the card. If I fail and roll lower than 90% in this case, I will take 4 damage. So I'd remove 4 of my 7 health cubes. So it can be pretty bad. So as you can imagine, traveling through time is pretty dangerous. So in this case, I would roll the dice. If I succeeded, I would take no damage and I would gain 3 time stream cards, simply drawing the top 3 from this time stream deck. If I roll lower than 90%, I take 4 damage, but I still get the 3 cards from the time stream deck. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to put these back on here. In order to move, I would have to pay the 4 cards out of hand, or I could play cards out of my hand of cards. And we're going to take a look at the different types of cards that you have in hand, because there are actually 5 types of time stream cards, each giving you a different function. First of all, we have the Paradox card. The Paradox card allows me to travel to a destination with no time stream drop and no temporal charge cost. Essentially, if I play this card, it will let me move from one destination to another without paying these first two costs. So I wouldn't have to drop any cards from my hand, and I wouldn't have to pay any of my temporal charges. I would, however, still need to make a risk roll if there was risk on that particular location. So the Paradox card can be very powerful for traveling and allowing you to save resources. Next, we have the Temporal Battery. The Temporal Battery allows you to restore one temporal charge. So you simply would play this card out of your hand, it just goes to a discard, and you would get to restore one of your used temporal charges. So this is a way to refill the temporal charges that you have. Likewise, there are bandages. Bandages allow you to restore one health. So again, discarding this from your hand allows you to restore one of your health cubes so that you don't end up succumbing to the damage that you take. We then have a card called Fracture. Fracture allows you to add a new destination to the timeline ahead of you at no cost. Normally, if you're adding a destination, so if I were to add a destination above Jamestown up here, it would cost me one of my temporal charges to do so, and that basically gives me another target destination that I can potentially travel to. However, if I play Fracture, I can simply add a new destination to the timeline and not pay that temporal charge. And then finally, the fifth card that we have is probably one of the more powerful cards in the game. This is called Loop. Loop allows me to return to any open destination from any timeline that is on the table, as long as the date is earlier than the date where I'm currently located. Doing so, if I play the Loop card, not only do I get to travel to any destination with an earlier date from where I currently am, but I also do not pay the drop cost, I don't pay the temporal cost, and I don't roll the risk. So in the case of that Hiroshima bombing card that we saw that had a 90% chance of taking 4 damage, if I played a Loop card to get there, basically travel backwards in time, so I'd have to come from something after 1945, date-wise, then I would be able to do that, gain those 3 cards that it was going to give me, but I wouldn't I wouldn't have to make that risk roll and risk a 90% chance of taking 4 damage. So very simple mechanics there. What I'm going to do, these are the 5 cards that I was dealt out. And so what I'm going to do, just to kind of demonstrate how some of this plays, I'm going to play Paradox because I don't want to drop 4 cards out of my hand. We'll simply drop that. So I get to ignore the drop cost, I get to ignore the cost here, and then I get to move my piece up to Jamestown. When I move into Jamestown, and I'm going to pan the camera up a little bit here, when I move to Jamestown, I reveal the next destination card. And in this case, I've turned up one of the time fragments. And in the game, you're looking for 4 time fragments. So as soon as you turn up a time fragment, you immediately turn up a new destination card to place on top of that time fragment. So this is the Hiroshima card that we just had. And that moves down here on top of the time fragment. Now when I travel to Hiroshima, I will automatically find this time fragment as well as gain any card rewards that are printed on the card. So that gives me a little bit of a way to find those time fragments moving throughout history and find the pieces that I need in order to return home. So the other thing I have to do, there's no risk here in Jamestown, so I don't have to do any kind of risk roll. And I gain 1 card. So I simply am going to draw 1 card from the time stream deck and place that in my hand. And I drew, just so everybody sees it, I drew a Paradox card. So I played a Paradox and I did the Paradox. So now I have the option to move into Hiroshima. So I can do the 0 card drop, I can pay 0 temporal charges and move, and then have to do a 90% roll with the dice, hopefully rolling equal to or higher than 90% to avoid taking 4 damage. However, lose or fail that roll, I would still gain the time fragment, and I would still gain the 3 cards as a reward that's printed on this destination card. I could play the Paradox card, which would allow me to move to Hiroshima. It wouldn't really do me any good in this case because there's no time stream drop or temporal charge cost already. The Loop card would be great to play because it would allow me to avoid the risk roll and rolling that 90% or higher. However, I cannot do this because Hiroshima happens in 1945 AD. I am currently located in 1863 AD, and one of the stipulations of playing the Loop card is I have to travel backwards in time. So the date that I would travel to would have to be earlier than my current date, and in this case it is not. So we're simply going to go ahead and I'm going to play my Fracture card. See if I can find a destination that I can add to the timeline that may be ahead of 1945 so that I can move there instead, maybe a less risky destination, and then use my Loop card. So we're going to play Fracture. We're going to grab a destination card off the deck. We're going to flip it over, and this is the French Revolution, 1789. I've got some costs here that I have to spend, a little less time to take some damage, or a little less chance to take damage. Just simply add that to the timeline. Since there's already a card directly above where I'm located, I will simply add the new destination either to the left or to the right of the destination above me. So I'm going to add that here. Doesn't really do me much good because obviously there's not a time fragment here, and 1789 AD is actually further back in time than where I wanted to go. So we're simply going to take the move, and I'm going to jump into Hiroshima, 1945, 0 card drop out of my hand, 0 temporal charge cost, and I simply move to here. Now I have to do, excuse me, now I have to do the risk roll where I take my die and I roll it, and I have to roll equal to or higher than a 90% or I'm going to take 4 damage. And I rolled an 83%, as you can see. So I'm going to take 4 damage, and that simply means I come down to my cube, I come down to my player card, and I pull 4 of the health cubes off of it and just set them aside. I have a bandage in my hand that we saw earlier, so I know that I can recover some of that. I'm going to draw 3 cards from the time stream deck, so we're going to grab 3 of those cards and add those to my hand, and I grabbed a fracture, a loop, and a temporal battery. So these are the 3 cards that I drew as my reward for traveling to Hiroshima successfully. More importantly, though, I get to take this time fragment card that is in Hiroshima, basically set it aside, and use that to place one of my green time fragment cubes on my player card. Also, for traveling to Hiroshima, I get to open a new destination for no cost. So I get to turn up the next destination card, and in this case we've opened up the Gutenberg printing press back in 1447. This is going to cost me to drop 2 cards out of my hand, pay 3 temporal charges, there's a 25% chance of taking 1 damage, and I would gain 1 extra time stream card at the end. This card now goes above Hiroshima, so to create a new timeline. And when I travel, it's important to point out that unless I have a card that allows me to do so, I can only travel from the timeline that I'm in to the next timeline up in the table. So as I'm moving up, so even though I'm here, I couldn't spend temporal charges to jump back to Jamestown down here because it's backwards in the timeline. I have to move forward in the timeline even though the dates are changed. Each row of cards is considered a timeline, and I can only move up the table as I'm moving, unless I have a card such as Paradox or Loop that would allow me to jump to any open destination. Play is going to continue in this fashion until one of 3 things happens. I either find all 4 time fragments and reassemble my time sphere. I then have to have, the game doesn't automatically end there. Once I've got my 4 time fragments, I still have to have at least 1 temporal charge left on my player card, or have one of the Paradox cards in my hand that allows me to travel to an open destination. If I have a Paradox card, I can use it, or I can use my 1 temporal charge to travel back to home May 20th, 2020 AD. That is how I win the game, the only way I can win the game. There are 2 ways you can lose the game, however. One of those ways is to run out of health. If my health meter ever runs out of its health down here, these all go away, I've basically died in the middle of history somewhere. And that's one way I can lose the game. The other way that I can lose the game is, let's say I have 3 temporal charges left, and I need to travel to Jamestown for some reason. And Jamestown is the only place I can travel to. If for some reason I do not have the temporal charges or the time stream cards in my hand to discard for these costs, if for any reason I can't pay one of those costs and I don't have any other alternatives as far as destinations to travel to, then I've become lost in time, and I can also lose the game that way. That is a brief overview of how to play Sojourn. Let's go back over and I'll tell you my thoughts. So that's a brief overview of Sojourn. Again, a solo card game, Wyvern Gaming. It's on Kickstarter now. You can check it out, take a look if it looks like something that would be fun for you. Again, it plays, playtime-wise, you're talking 10 to 20 minutes. It's a very quick game. You can play multiple games of it in a single sitting, in fact. A lot of times, at least for me, when I've played it and failed miserably, I think I've played it probably a dozen times or so now, and I've won a couple of them. But I like to go in and reset and try it again, especially when I lose, because I'm like, okay, no, I can do something differently and fix it. So definitely enjoy the game. I like how fast it plays. It's very simple to pick up and to teach. Or it's a solo game, so you're not really teaching it, but it's very quick to learn and simple to learn. There's not a lot of rules to it. There's not a lot to bog you down. Yeah, I really enjoyed this game. Being able to get a game out, solo game, set it up on the table, shuffle a couple of small decks of cards, throw them down, deal out 5 cards, and go. Setup time is really low. Play time is really low. You're talking 10 to 20 minutes of play time, which is really awesome. I love the artwork on the cards. On not only the destination cards, but on the time stream cards as well. It's a very cool feel. The backs of the time stream cards, especially, very much that neon kind of retro time travel-y feel, which is kind of cool with it. I will say, in terms of kind of downsides or things that I could see some folks not enjoying. One of those is the fact that some of the destinations in the game are points in history that are not great points in history. You have things from history like, we saw the Hiroshima bombing. Obviously, some folks may have family members that remember that are still around today. But there are even more recent events than that in the deck that could hit a little close to home for some folks. Things like the Challenger explosion in '86. I remember that not from when I was a kid. You may have caught glimpses of the Twin Towers in my overview video, 9/11, 2001, the World Trade Center attacks is in the deck as well. That you also have Hurricane Katrina from New Orleans in 2005. So there are some things that could hit a little close to home. They're not saying they shouldn't be in the game, they should be removed, and that's not where I'm coming from. I just want to let people know that they are there. So if one of those events is something that hits a little close to home for you, maybe that's a card you remove and set aside. It wouldn't affect gameplay at all. There's plenty of other destinations from way back in history. When you go back even as far as Pompeii, the French Revolution we saw, the American Revolution is in there. There's a lot of different events like that. Kind of the one downside rub with the game, I really wouldn't say this is a reason to not play it, but it's more grasping at straws to find something wrong, if you will, is the amount of table space the game takes up. It takes up a lot of your table. This isn't a game you're going to be able to easily play on a TV tray or an airplane tray, on a train. You're going to need a hospital, bedside table. You're going to need a big table for this. The cards being as large as they are and stacking those destinations, long ways on top of one another, it travels up the table quite a lot. And there have been plenty of games I've played where I've started seated, but because the timeline has gone so far up the table, I've had to stand up and kind of lean over the table to reach the later timelines where I'm actually traveling. And I've done some kind of workarounds with that where I've pulled some things over and moved. I've pulled over and maybe moved the timeline. Okay, I've maxed out. I'm going to pull it down here. And so now the bottom of this lines up with the top up here and done it that way so I can still see all the cards. I've stacked them in some ways to where, when a new destination came out, I covered up the picture of the destination I just moved from and just kept the cost and the rewards visible and the risk roll visible. But even that presents some problems because you can't see really what other destinations there are out there. You can't see the dates on the cards. I don't know if maybe moving the name of the destination and the date down to the bottom of the card, if that's something that would fix that, because then you could stack the cards. I have also played it where I've taken the destinations and had the destinations go from left to right on my table, and rather than going up and then kind of going up and then spreading out for the timelines, they've gone left to right and then spread up and down if I've had multiple destinations in a timeline, and that seems to work okay. But it still takes up a lot of space because there's still a lot of cards coming out every time you move to a new destination. A new destination comes out, so it definitely spreads out across the table. But again, that's not a reason that I would say it's not enough that would make me go, no, don't play this game. Definitely check this game out if you're into solo games. If you're not into solo games, it's probably not something that you're going to pick up because it doesn't change or do anything revolutionary. But if you're a solo gamer looking for something quick that you can just you've got 20 minutes to kill and looking for something to play, maybe you're waiting on buddies to show up for game night and you want to get a little bit of a warm up going for yourself, pop this game out. Like I said, you shuffle a couple decks of cards, you deal out a hand of 5 cards, and you go. And you're done in 10 to 20 minutes. So very cool, very quick to play. Definitely check out Sojourn. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. There's also a Kickstarter link down there for linking over to the Kickstarter page to check that out. And until next time, keep gaming, friends.